out this cold January evening in Michigan. This establishment means so much to Jamil and myself. They've been through a wonderful journey here in the city of Grand Rapids, and they're some of the entrepreneurs that we're most proud of because of what they've been able to do over here on the west side. And so it's only right that we bring up Steve and Taylor to talk a little bit about their journey and bring the music beyond.
Yeah. So I'm Steve, this is Taylor, we're the Smiths. We first want to just welcome you guys to Muse GR. This was a big dream that we had, and it's actually come to a reality. So we're excited, we're very excited just to see it full, and to see people here smiling and have good people in here.
Thank you. I'll explain a little bit what Muse is. Muse is a creative space. We really encourage people to come here and collaborate and to do something creative. It's something that Steve had first envisioned as a photography studio, and it's kind of just branched into this art gallery where we encourage people to create music and draw and have events and participate in workshops and just learn and grow and come together as a community. So we invite you all to continue to join us as we continue this year and do that, create in this space and open the doors to the community to do that.
Another thing, Jamil asked me to explain just a little bit about our process. So basically, we originally was going to do a photography studio. We purchased this building in 2016. It was, some of you guys might not know, it was originally an adult bookstore. So we purchased it, did renovations, and we were trying to open up a photography studio, but that wasn't a permitted use, like on a main street. So we needed to come up with something that had more foot traffic. So we met with Jamel and Jelks, and we was meeting with people from the city, and we just were going back and forth until we figured out a great business that we wanted to bring to the city. So that's how Muse got here. We did want to tell you guys all the artists for sale. Yeah. And something that is really cool, we really love purpose and passion, helping other people discover their purpose and their passion. And we're about to roll out our initiative for education. It'll be called Mused. The ED is in parentheses, so it's like Muse Ed. So you guys will be seeing some really cool things happening with youth and adult learning possibilities, and it's going to be a nonprofit. So pretty soon we're going to have like an opening event for that. So we love to see you guys come and support that. And that's it. Thank you.
Steve, I love the way he articulated that. He's being so humble. When we first walked through this space, it was raw. It was kind of like in Pulp Fiction, man. There were trap doors in here with the guy with the leather mask. Like those spaces were a part of this building, and they've done such a great job of getting this up and running and being a part of the resurgence on the west side. So when we think about entrepreneurship, and we think about young people who are obviously investing in their future, but also into the city of Grand Rapids, these are those folks. We should have them at the top of our list of the epitome of what we want Grand Rapids to be. So we thank them again for hosting this event.
And the last thing I would say is probably the most important thing is the support, like just the support that we receive, even looking around this room. It's so many key people that made sure that we got this off the ground. So thank you to all the people that helped us. We appreciate it.
We're running late in typical jokes fashion. Jamil's very it's tight. But I'm no stranger to being fashionably late, man, as you know. But we have Miss Andrea Wallace with us today as our moderator. We couldn't have all this testosterone up here and not have female representation, women representation at the highest level. Miss Andrea Wallace was a part of Blue Cross Blue Shield's innovation team. What is your technical position?
I'm the Innovation Portfolio Manager.
Innovation Portfolio Manager. She is an important woman to know in the city, so she's joining us and helping us get this thing going. So in the interest of time, Mayor, I'm going to jump right into these questions. Everybody knows who you are. We know your credentials. Jamil and I founded the Grad 5 Business Accelerator. It's a partnership with the City of Grand Rapids and Start Garden to help businesses grow. And Muse being one of those businesses, we felt like this was a good way to do an inaugural event for 2019. So that's one of the reasons why we were inspired to put this together. But we are so honored to have the Honorable Mayor Bliss here. And we wanted to put together something really special where we felt that younger generation leadership could connect with the mayor, because we feel like oftentimes we have people who represent us but you don't have access to them. You can't ask the questions that are on your mind, some of the things that may be near and dear to your hearts or are on the front lines of the hearts of the people in the neighborhoods that you grew up in and or live in, don't get communicated directly to the people who can influence the policy, who make the policy. And so the mayor being a big supporter of ours and her taking our calls, and me being obnoxious, the obnoxious guy that I am, if you know me, we said, Mayor, we need you to do this for us, and she's taking this time out of her schedule to make it happen. So Mayor, I'm going to kick off these questions, and I think we'll start with something light. The City of Grand Rapids. What is this city's best attributes in your mind?
All right, thank you. Well, I'm going to say a few words before I answer that. So first, I want to say thank you for inviting me. These are two of my favorite people I've been able to work with over the last several years, and have called on them many a times to actually help me, and they were very supportive of me the first time I ran for mayor and helped me meet with a lot of key people, and they set up listening sessions for me to help me really learn what the critical issues were. So I want to say thank you, both of you. I also want to give a shout out to my colleague over there, Commissioner Jones. I'm absolutely honored to serve with him. And I'm going to give a shout out to Aquanetto, who's been going around, and everyone who signed my petition. Thank you. So this is the joy of both serving as mayor and going into an election year, is that you now have to do both. So appreciate that. That's part of the process to get on the ballot. And I know we also have a candidate running in the second ward. Melinda is here tonight. Melinda is CC, if you don't know her. So anyway, and then thank you for hosting in this beautiful space. This is really what we need to do a whole lot more of in Grand Rapids. And I know I have some city staff here too who work their tails off to move forward some of our ideas that we talk about at the commission table. We're the ones that talk about it and set policy, but the staff are the ones that really carry it out. So the staff, city staff who are here tonight, I just want to say thank you to you as well. So what is our greatest asset here in Grand Rapids? I really believe it's what's in this room. It's the people. It's the people who open spaces like this. It's the people who come alongside their neighbor when they're struggling. It's the people who, come to the table time and time again, even when they feel like they're sick and tired of talking about an issue and they want to see change. They're still committed. They're still showing up. They're still sitting through difficult processes. They're still being discouraged and getting back up the next day and finding their feet and saying, I'm not giving up. And without the people, I don't think our city would be what it is today. And it sure wouldn't be making a lot of progress that it's making today. I don't do anything in isolation. In fact, I do very little all by myself. It's really when people come together and I'm able to be a part of that and figure out what can I bring to the table in this position that I am so grateful to hold. What influence can I bring? What voice can I bring to the table? And then how can I help do my part to move it forward? But it really happens because of people. And you look at every neighborhood, you look at business districts, all of those were created by the passion and the heart of the people who live there, who call it home, who love this place, who have an emotional connection to the place. So I look out around this room, I know many of you, you're really what makes this city awesome.
So I would like to selfishly talk about business growth.
All right, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so the question that I think I have is really around what do you feel your leadership approach is in terms of business growth for the city of Grand Rapids? So that would be including, new emerging things like startups, also just business growth for businesses that are already here. Like, where do you see us heading in that direction?
Yeah. So there's a couple things with business growth. I would say, and you'll probably hear me say this multiple times tonight, there's really no one solution or silver bullet to anything. I think ultimately, my hope for our city is that we are going to be this incredibly vibrant place where if you're a startup or an entrepreneur, this is a place where you can get the support you need to be successful and to thrive. Not saying that you're going to be successful every time, but you're going to have the support you need to try and sometimes fail, and you're going to have support to learn from that mistake or learn from that experience and get up and try again. For the city, my hope is that we are an incredibly business-friendly city, no matter what size your company is. The heart and soul of our local economy is local businesses, and so we need to make sure that we are a space and a place that supports our local businesses. And so we need to do that in the city, but we also have to do it individually, so we have to make decisions. I know there's a couple of folks from Local First here. We have to make personal decisions to support our local businesses and spend our dollars locally and keep them here, generating and circulating in our local economy. But then at the city, so I'm looking at some of our city staff, we have to make sure that we're a city that is supportive of businesses, that we're business friendly, that when you come down and you are getting a permit or you need to get some support for something, that we're coming alongside of you. And I think sometimes government can be pretty intimidating to people, especially if they don't have the experience and they don't know how to navigate it. So we need to come alongside people and help them get to yes, instead of giving a whole list of reasons why we can't do something. So I think internally, I think personally, we all need to support local businesses. I think at the city, as my colleagues on the city commission, we need to be very deliberate about saying we want to be a city that is business friendly. And then we need to make sure that we have policies and procedures that are aligned with that. We need to make sure that we're super user friendly. When you need something from the city, we have great customer service. And then we need to go out and we need to make sure that the companies that are here stay here. So I have the privilege, I would say, sometimes it's an interesting experience, but I have the privilege to go out and talk to a lot of businesses that are here, talk to them about their experience. Sometimes they're in the midst of thinking about moving and we're making the case why they should stay. Also have the opportunity to talk to businesses that are thinking about coming to Grand Rapids, and Grand Rapids is competing with Chicago and Detroit and Cincinnati and Indianapolis and making the case why they should come and invest in our city. So again, we need to really have this multi-pronged approach, right? We want the companies that are here to stay here and to grow and to thrive and to hire locally, to be intentional in their hiring, to remove barriers in their hiring. We need to attract new companies, global companies, but then we also need to support the small businesses.
So Jamil, you're just not going to do any work today. Mayor, let's talk a little bit about your history. You were a second ward commissioner before you were the mayor, and served very well in that capacity. And in that capacity, as I remember, you sitting down with my dad all those years ago, talking about what your priorities were. At the top of the list was neighborhoods. Discuss some of the initiatives that you've led in your tenure to empower neighborhoods, and talk to us a little bit of how the younger generation can get involved with that and where you see them fitting in.
I love to be a city commissioner. Sometimes I actually get jealous when I hear Commissioner Jones and Kelly talking about neighborhood and constituent work, because I really love that. I was able to serve as second ward commissioner for 10 years, and I was able to work on a lot of neighborhood projects, from the Full Street Farmers Market to the bioswales on Plainfield, you name it. Commissioner Kelly and I were often at the table on a lot of those projects. Neighborhood, I love our neighborhoods. We have 32 amazing neighborhoods throughout our city, and they all are unique, and they have their history, and they have what really makes them beautiful. And as I said, the people are the ones that really create the culture of every neighborhood and the feeling of our unique neighborhoods. So I really love our neighborhoods. I love my neighborhood. I live in Fulton Heights, but I spend a lot of time in Easttown and Cherry Hill area, Wealthy Street. And I love each one for different reasons. And so when I became mayor, actually about a year before serving as mayor, Mayor Hartwell appointed me to a small task force to look at what can we do to support neighborhoods. And so I was on actually with some of you in this room, I was on the inaugural group that helped plan the initial neighborhood summit. And the intent of that was, how do we bring people together, talk about the importance of neighborhoods, but also look at best practices throughout the country. So what can we learn? I'm a big believer that there's a lot we can learn from other cities. And so we had, this is not working. So we had our neighborhood summit, and I remember after the neighborhood summit, we kind of said, okay, now this summit, now that we kind of have a platform for it, we want you, the community, to take it over and to lead it. So we are now going into our 5th year, our 5th neighborhood summit in March, so I'm really excited about that. Part of that also was identifying the need in the city to have somebody who is a point person for neighborhoods. And so my first year as mayor, we created the position that is now held by Stacy Stout. So many of you know Stacy. She's a total rock star. I love having her in the city. She has taken on a lot of different initiatives around neighborhoods, and she's become the point person for that. She helps with the neighborhood summit. But she also is moving forward the Neighborhood Connectors program, trying to build capacity, especially in our neighborhoods that don't have strong capacity right now. And then we also, about a year after the first summit, the City Commission allocated funds to create the Neighborhood Match Fund, with the belief that when you have passionate people who care about their neighborhood, that's right, with a little bit of resources, they can do amazing things, right? So how do we at the city take our resources and support community to do things in their own neighborhood? And that was really the hallmark of the Neighborhood Match Fund. So we did that this last budget cycle. We actually increased the funding for the Neighborhood Match Fund. But then we've done a lot of work, and I give a shout out to Kara, and I know AJ's done some of this as well. We focused a lot also on making sure that we have strong neighborhood business districts. So we've had, in the last several years, I was on the very first Uptown Quarter Improvement District Board and the bid board, and seeing what can happen again when you're able to collect funds and have the people who live in that neighborhood make decisions about how those funds are used to invest in their neighborhood, really incredible things happen. And so really Uptown SID was kind of a template for a number of other SIDs that we now see throughout the city. So Westside SID and Southtown SID we're working on right now, North Quarter. And so what we did at the city is we said we need to make sure that we have support in place to support the SIDs to be successful. And so we added a position at the city to help support our SIDs, hopefully some more bids coming online, to really build the capacity they need, but then also make sure that we're complying with state law, because it's a state. I'm not gonna get in the weeds, but there's a lot of state rules we have to follow, unfortunately, sometimes. And so this also helps to make sure that we're in compliance with that. So I think we need to make sure that for neighborhoods, we're focusing on supporting the work being done by neighbors in neighborhoods, but then also we have to make sure that their neighborhood business district is really strong and that they have resources to do what they want to do in their neighborhood. So those are some of the things that we've done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You ready to jump in?
I guess I do some work now.
Yeah. Are we back now? All right.
All right, so in 2015, Forbes ranked Grand Rapids as the 2nd worst place for African Americans based upon self-employment rates, home ownership, and also median income. In your very first State of the City address, one of the big things that you wanted to tackle was racial equity in the city. And with that being your first year, making such a bold statement to say, as a city, you want to move forward and be a more equitable place for everyone to be able to grow. What made you make that decision to take that stand, especially that's that's, at the top of the list of things that need to be tackled. But what progress have you seen? What have been some of the efforts and the initiatives around making this a more equitable place where everyone can thrive?
That's a great question. So before that Forbes article came out, there was actually another report that came out a couple of months before that, that the Michigan Department of Civil Rights had done, and it looked at the disparities that exist in the county. And I remember I was city commissioner at the time, and I remember sitting at the commission table when that report was given, and the data that they had collected was absolutely shocking. I think subjectively, you hear the stories of disparities, but then when you have really significant data to show the disparities that exist in our city, and then shortly after that, the Forbes report came out, I really think it's a call to action, right? Like, once you know something, how do you not do something about it, especially if you're in a position of power? And so for me, both of those reports really led to having the data to say we need to do better. And for me, I think it is a core issue, because in our city, if we're not a great place for everyone, then we're not a great place. And it was really heartbreaking. There's so many things about our city that I love and I'm proud of, but I'm not proud of that. And no one should be. And so to me, when I was campaigning, I talked about racial disparities, and I was really honest. I met with a lot of people, actually, both of you connected me with a lot of people. I had to learn quickly. I had to look in the mirror. I had to look at my own biases and privilege, and I had to figure out what to do. And I remember the first time I ran, I was really honest with people, and I said, I don't know how I'm going to fix this. It's systemic racism that's deep, and it's complex, and I don't have the answers. But I do believe that we have people in this community that can come together to create change and to address it and eliminate racial disparities. I really still believe that we can eliminate racial disparities. So after my election, I reached out to about everybody I knew who was an expert in the space, and I asked them to help me, to help me figure out a plan to move forward. And fortunately, I was able to identify a lot of support in the community who came alongside me. So internally at City Hall, I knew that we had to make change, and so I started looking at other cities that were really leaps and bounds ahead of us in this work. So I reached out to my colleagues in Seattle and Minneapolis. Seattle really had set the stage for a structure to look at racial equity. I was connected with some folks at the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. I reached out to them. Actually, Stacey Stout helped me apply to be a part of a cohort of 5 cities that would walk together and learn how to embed racial equity into their organization. And so we spent 2 years with a team from City Hall looking at our own internal policies and procedures related to a whole host of things, including hiring and youth involvement and engagement. And then also, how do we embed a racial equity toolkit into our budget decisions? So are we spending resources, and are we making decisions that reduce or eliminate or have no disparate impact? So we did that work for a long time. We're in the process of implementing it. We also brought in-house through the National Equity Project at City Hall a number of racial equity and leadership trainings, which is a very intensive training. And I think we're up to 110 of our city employees, all different levels throughout the organization, have gone through that training, and we're continuing that. And then in the community, about a year and a half ago, I asked a number of leaders within the community to come join me in a racial equity initiative, where we would look at current disparities specifically to unemployment and our neighborhoods of focus. So we have about 17 neighborhoods in our city, we call them neighborhoods of focus, but they're 17 census tracts, 17 neighborhoods where we have really, really significant disparities, especially around employment and access to opportunity. And how do we create a plan to increase opportunity in those neighborhoods? And so Jamil's on that with me, along with a whole host of other folks. There's about 42 of us And we've been working together over the last year to come up with very specific things that we can do to address racial disparities in those neighborhoods. And then we were happy to see that there's a joint effort that Michigan Works and Talent 2025 is doing, really looking at companies and having them look at their hiring practices to make sure that their hiring practices eliminate unconscious bias. So we looked at what Mercy Health and the impact that that's had on their workforce. And so we're asking other large companies throughout the community to take that model and start it within their organization because we know it works. And so that's some of the work that we're doing. We still have a lot of work to do, you know, and it's complex. We're not where we need to be, but I do believe that we're at least moving in the right direction. And honestly, I go around the country and I meet with other mayors and I sometimes speak on panels. And I can tell you not every city is talking about racial disparities. Not every city has a focus internally or within the community saying we need to be talking about equity every single conversation we're having. And if you listen to the conversations around the table at City Hall, it's a different conversation than it was 5 years ago. And that's not just because of me, it's because this is a shared value. And we're all committed to this. And I believe that there's been a real shift in leadership, not just within City Hall, but really throughout the community where we've come together. You've seen it at the Community Foundation, you've seen it with small organizations, you've seen it in nonprofits. We're really looking to impact and making sure that the decisions we're making do not have a disparate impact and that it's creating more opportunity for everyone.
That's great. We're going to do two more quick questions.
All right.
One from me, one from Jay, and then we're going to open this up to the audience. And I'm telling all of you guys, you better behave, especially you, Tommy. I don't even know if I want to see your hand go up. Mayor, in times like these, we need more women leadership than ever. You were ahead of your time as a trailblazing elected official. And as an advocate, describe your come up a little bit because we have so many women in the audience here today, which is so beautiful. And I want to talk a little bit about the climate when you were young. You're still young, but when you were younger, on your come up, entering into a traditionally male-dominated political atmosphere. I also want to know, what do you think prevents more women from seeking office and leadership roles, and even starting businesses here in the city where we don't see enough of that? And also, are there any, because we're solutions oriented here, so are there any organizations that were instrumental in your come up that young women who are out here today and in the community, you can share the good word and get them involved with those organizations?
Well, I don't know if we have enough time to talk about my first few years on the commission when I was the only woman. I might need a drink for that. And it's interesting too, because when I was first elected on the commission, I was 30 years old. So I'm 43, if you're wondering. So I was 30 years old at the time, and I was the only woman. And so sometimes it was hard for me to figure out, like, am I being treated this way because I'm young? I was probably like the youngest by about 25 years on the commission. So I couldn't quite tell if it was my age or my gender or probably a mix of both. So maybe I'll write a book someday. But I'll tell you what made the difference for me, and all of our journeys are different. But I do think that there's a couple common factors that I often hear when I talk to other women in leadership. So for me, I would not be sitting here where I'm sitting right now if it wasn't for a whole host of women who believed in me. It's really women. I never ever thought I was going to run for office. So I'm a social worker. I have a master's degree in social work. I worked in the field of domestic violence and child welfare. I was running a nonprofit organization that I absolutely loved. I was doing community work, so I was organizing events around International Women's Day, and I was advocating for rape kits to get analyzed because they were sitting on shelves and it was driving me crazy. I was going to court with victims and I was seeing how poorly they were treated, and I was talking to prosecutors and trying to get PPOs turned around more quickly. And it was through my work that I met a whole host of women who were very active in the community, and they were very committed on getting more women elected to office, because back in 2004, 2005, there were very few women around any table, county commission, city commission. And it was a group of women that I met through my work who encouraged me to run for office. And I remember I was like, no way. At the time I was 29, I was divorced, I was living in this really tiny apartment in East Town, I was working 2 jobs, trying to pay off my student loans. I mean, I was like, no, this is not for me. And then they were very persistent, one, and then I started to get much more engaged in local issues. And one of the big things that ended up being an issue for me that I ended up actually running on when I first ran in '05 is that the city commission was in the beginning phases of the economic downturn, and they were closing all of our city swimming pools. And at the time, not to get too much into the details, but at the time I was serving on a county-wide group called the Child Death Review Team. Child Death Review Team, we would review all of the deaths in the county. I worked at Spectrum Health at the time as a medical social worker and responded to cases that came in where children had died or had been injured. And I knew the data, the numbers on how many kids drowned because they don't know how to swim. And in urban areas, there's a higher rate of drowning because more kids don't know how to swim because they don't have access to swim lessons, and there's a whole host of reasons. And so that was really one of the early issues that I'm like, what are they doing closing down swimming pools? Are they out of their minds? Like, this is, like, where are kids gonna go in the summer? And I was working with families in the city, and so anyway, that was one of my big issues. In fact, I pulled out my early speech. Tommy Allen, you may have been at Riverside Park when I announced it. When I announced I was going to run for city commission, I talked about parks, and I talked about pools, and I talked about kids, and I talked about neighborhoods, and they have to have playgrounds for kids that are safe, and pools where kids can learn how to swim. So that was kind of my decision point, but I never ever would have gotten there if it wasn't for a group of women encouraging me to run. And they not only encouraged me to run, they said, Rosalynn, if you run, we're with you, 100%. We'll walk with you, we'll help you raise money. You can count on us no matter what. And they were. I mean, even Verna Shad, God bless her, she, I think, had turned, 80 on one of my night events. And I mean, I was so touched, but I have to say, they saw qualities in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think that, going to your question about women not stepping into leadership, I sometimes talk, especially, I do a lot of speaking to women and girls, and I talk about a confidence gap. I think a lot of girls and women have a confidence gap. And again, there's a whole myriad of reasons why that is. But we need to help build up women, and we need to help them see the amazing things in themselves, and that women can be really great leaders. And I can tell you, women need to support more women, because some of my harshest, most awful things that have ever been said to me have also been said by women. So I'm like, look, we rise and fall together, right? Like, we need to support one another. So, and I always say, I'm not perfect. None of us are. I make mistakes. I try my best to fix a mistake after I've made it. It's so much more helpful if you give me a call and say, hey, you didn't do a very good job at that, and I want to help you learn how to do better next time, instead of calling me 17 different ugly names, right? It's not helpful. So anyway, that's what I always encourage women to do, like, come alongside your peers and be an ally and support them to grow. And if women didn't do that, I would not be here. There's some great groups in town right now. I'm so glad. I was so happy to see the election with so many women that got elected. Yay! But that's just, we have more work to do. I mean, we really do. Even with all the women that were elected, we're still less than 35% of elected positions. And you know, there's some great groups in town. So the group that helped me, really helped me, was Progressive Women's Alliance. They're a PAC. They helped me raise money early on. They were amazing. But there's Urban Girls. I mean, they're this great group of women who get together and support each other. Forum, Forum's a little official, kind of corporate. Yeah, but there's some great people I've met through Forum. So you just got to find what works for you. And then if you can't find something, just start your own. I started a book club because I'm like, I want to have a small group of women that I can get together with and really have honest conversations. So, create your own if you feel like you don't want to go and, be a part of a corporate, larger group. So, yeah.
Jeff, close us out and then we'll get the Q&A going.
So sort of in that same vein, this is about talent attraction and talent retention here in Grand Rapids. So, a few weeks ago, I was at the 2019 Outlook that the Right Place puts on every year for West Michigan. It's like basically what they think is going to happen over the next year in terms of jobs being available, all that. And one of the things that was the biggest point that every company was complaining about was the talent crunch. Like, that people have had a hard time finding people to hire. So just curious on your thoughts around, do you think that, Grand Rapids is a city, we're kind of competing against the global economy now. Do you think that we have, what it takes to both attract and retain the talent that's already here? And what additional do you think could be done?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a couple things. One, I think we have a lot of great talent right here in Grand Rapids. I think we really, really do. We really do. And I can't tell you how many times I talk to somebody who's absolutely brilliant and they can't even get in the door for an interview. So we need to make sure that we're opening doors and creating opportunity for all the talent that is here in our city already. I've talked to a lot of people who leave Grand Rapids because they never get a shot, and that drives me crazy. So I think we absolutely have to appreciate and value and nurture the talent that is here. Make sure that we have pipelines for them as well. There are a lot of jobs that we know that there needs to be additional workforce development and outreach in. And we can do that. I mean, we have great resources with nonprofits like The Source, our community college, Grand Valley. There's a lot of folks working in that space. We need to make sure they have the resources. The thing is, it has to be data driven, right? So you have to know what those jobs are. So what are those jobs that are coming down the line 5, 10 years from now? What are the skills needed to do those jobs? And then how do you have the workforce development today that enables people to get those jobs? And I believe we have the resources in this community to do that. And then of course we need to attract talent. I know I've talked to a lot of different organizations at the hospital, the research center. Of course they're looking for talent globally and trying to get them here. So when I think of bringing someone to Grand Rapids who's thinking about moving here with their family, one, we have to be this really great city and have the amenities that they're looking for to compete with other cities. But ultimately, we need to be inclusive. We need to be diverse. We need to make sure that they feel welcomed, regardless of their background and ethnicity when they walk into a place. And so that's some of the work that we have to do, because I hear people too who come here for recruitment and they spend several days here, and sometimes they fall in love with the city and they're like, yes, I'm definitely going there. But sometimes they don't, because they don't feel like they're going to belong here. So we need to get beyond. I was at several, I don't even know how long ago, several weeks ago, I was at an event with Scott, and we were talking about how do we be a city where people feel like they belong, that they really feel an emotional connection to space, but they also feel like they're able to connect with other people. So that's some of the work that we have to do. But we have a lot of talent here.
We need more places to party. What up, ladies?
And of course that helps.
Yeah.
It does.
Overall quality of life.
That's right.
All right, we're going to get into question and answer here. And we want everybody to keep it respectful. Jamil, Andrea, and I will deem if the question is respectable and reserve the right to keep it moving on you if we don't feel like it's productive and solutions oriented. That's how it's going to go. You don't want anybody grandstanding either, so ask the question and then let's get the next person in. All right? Sound good? That's the rules of engagement. Raise your hand and we will call upon you. Who is going to be the chosen one? I know there's got to be some questions for the honorable Rosalynn. Or somebody just make a question up and break the office up. Monroe, I keep.
All black district, specifically. Like I say, like Granville, drive the bus, I know. I go to Granville and there's nothing but, the culture, so just driving. in one district, you know what I mean? It's never gonna be like a all black district here in Grand Rapids.
Interesting. You paid big bucks to answer those questions.
You know, I mean, ultimately, I don't know. I mean, my hope would be that we would have diversity throughout our city. And that, I mean, I've looked at maps, I've looked at maps that date back to redlining. You know, I see the segregation that still exists today, especially in our neighborhoods. And my hope would be that we're much more diverse throughout the entire city. That regardless of the color of your skin, if you want to be in a certain neighborhood, you feel like you belong there. But I also really respect communities that want to have a cultural identity in a space. And you see that on Granville. I think actually a conversation is happening around Southtown. And do you have a space where you really can feel and have, you know, different spaces that really celebrate culture and the cultural identity of that neighborhood. So I'm not opposed to it. I think it may happen. I don't see it driven by City Hall. I think it has to be organic and it has to come from the neighborhood to create that. And I do think that's what you're seeing on Granville, even all of their planning that they went through. They were very intentional about wanting to honor and celebrate the history and the culture of Granville Avenue. And I think you also see it in the work that's happening like with Plaza Roosevelt. So I don't know. Yeah.
I just, real quick,
Yeah.
Real quick.
So, when I go to the store, and I look at coaches always being sold. You got Mexican cheese, you got Irish butter. Never seen an African American cheese like everything. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, why is that product not even being like, you know what I'm saying, projected? What's the essence of us? You know what I'm saying? Like, what product can we sell to other cultures that they would need? I look at things like that. You know what I'm saying? When it comes to that in the black district, like this identification crisis going on. I drive buses and I see kids, they just wild out, they tuned in, they're not looking at reality. You know what I'm saying? Use yo, beautiful. You know what I'm saying? And it's like more children need to see superheroes like that. You know what I mean? So it's like that's why it's important for like an all-black district. Just throw it out there like that because it's needed, because these kids don't know who to look up to anymore.
That's great insight. I think on the business stuff, I would refer you to Mr. Jamil Robinson. He has the district coming on Eastern, so the business ideas and getting a product in the stores like the Street Market, Mosby's Popcorn is in there now, and also Daddy Dough. And so there's more opportunities now for that.
So from a grab standpoint, yeah, we're looking at doing that. So way back, I think it was 2014, I've been saying we need a district. And so we just purchased property on Eastern and Burton where we're looking at kind of, where we're calling it the district. So District 2012, where we're looking to be that epicenter and help businesses get going and then be able to populate within a very concentrated area. And so it may not be every single one as far as the empty bays or the empty retail spaces that exist, but we're looking at that being a space, especially with the high density and all that other kind of stuff. So we can talk about that.
Yeah, we'll get to that offline. So back to the mayor business.
Charlie had it.
So thank you for hosting this, Mayor, thank you for your time. Looking over the city and seeing all the community transformation, revitalization, gentrification, whatever you want to call it, and seeing how the intent is to bring about greater development in certain communities, but ends up creating displacement for those communities. What is your feelings or your sense about that displacement and development and how cultures or communities can maintain and remain grounded in their space while so much power and money is shifting around to shift them in or out in the name of development?
Well, you just named the greatest issue that I have wrestled with since sitting in this seat. And I would actually say that the City Commission has wrestled with, is figuring out what we can do at the policy level and at a governmental level to prevent displacement and gentrification, ensure affordable housing throughout the city, that people aren't pushed out of neighborhoods, And we've really wrestled with that, and it has shown. We've had hours and hours of work sessions. We've looked at what other cities have done. We've tried to figure out how can we incent mixed income developments. We have aggressively gone after low-income housing tax credits at the state level and pushed the state to have and support low-income projects in neighborhoods to prevent displacement. And then figuring out what can we do with federal opportunity zones. I think that is a double-edged sword, and cities all over the place are very, very concerned about potential negative impact and displacement and gentrification. And so we've done a number of things at the city. We've changed policies. We've increased our down payment assistance. We've funded and supported a pilot program for an eviction court. We've set up a rental assistance program through the Housing Commission. We passed a rental application ordinance. We just passed some zoning changes that we're trying to make sure that we're creating opportunity for smaller infill that's more affordable. We've changed our incentives, and we've tried to incent affordable housing in some of these developments that also have market rate. And so we're wrestling with that too. And the unfortunate thing is that there are not best practices throughout the country to look at. I have talked to so many mayors. I have talked about like what are effective policies where you can actually show a positive impact 3-5 years later. And good to see you, Mark. There are very, very few out there, and so much of it is driven by the private sector. And that's really what we're grappling with. We've talked about land trust. ICCF is doing some really creative work with the 177 houses that they purchased. I think we, unlike some other communities, we actually are incredibly fortunate to have so many nonprofit housing organizations that we can work with and partner with. There are a lot of cities that don't have the ICCFs and the dwelling place and the habitat and the link up. They don't have those organizations in their community. I can tell you last year, we were successful in getting a number of LIHTC projects. This last round in October, we got 6. We got more than any other city in the state of Michigan. And that is needed. So we need to make sure that we continue to have low-income housing available for folks. The struggle is this kind of missing middle, right? We have a lot of market rate going online. We have some low-income housing coming online. But if you don't qualify for low income and you can't afford market rate, we have this affordability issue, which is related to wages. People need to make more money. And some of the bills passed in lame duck last month isn't helping us get there. So that's not really an answer. I wish I had an answer. If I did, it would make our jobs a whole lot easier. It's still a top priority to us. Fortunately, our new city manager is actively jumping in on this issue as well. The other setback, I don't know if all of you watched this, but last month the county commission dissolved the Kent County Land Bank. We have over 160 properties that we're in the process of redeveloping with the land bank in our city. And now at the city level, we need to figure out how we're going to get back ownership of those properties, but also we put in some strict guidelines about those properties needing to be developed into affordable housing. And so now that's a whole nother issue and a tool that no longer exists in our community. And the county made a decision without really thinking through the potential ramifications of the city at the city level, which they do sometimes, as you know. I appreciate the county in some things, but they know I'm not very happy about that decision. And so those are the struggles that continue to come up, right? It's like one step forward, 17 back. So that's why we need all of us coming together, saying that we need to be a city where people can afford to live and to stay and to raise their families, especially those that have lived here for generations.
The efforts that you did mention though, is it located somewhere so when people also feel helpless or hopeless that they can find it in one space? I mean, you did name off a few things that are in process? Is
Yeah.
there any, like,
Yeah, so we have that on our city website, but if you reach out, I'm glad to direct you to it, because we did a number of other things too. We adjusted the eligibility for forgiveness if you can't pay your taxes. So we really looked at what do we have the ability to change internally at City Hall that we know potentially is a barrier that could impact someone either staying in their home or being able to afford a home. And then we're trying to work really closely with rental property owners too. Oh, they were pretty unhappy with the rental property ordinance that we passed. So it's a challenge sometimes. But yeah, we do have all of that on the city website, including the four zoning ordinances that we passed at our last meeting in December.
Yep, John.
Hi.
Nope, there's no mic for you, bro.
Oh, man.
Project your voice.
Thanks, man. So I think he actually just asked a question that I think we spoke to a lot of the questions I had about policy, but just maybe from maybe a broader standpoint, we have a commission right now, it's probably one of the most progressive commissions that we have had in a long time. And there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between the commission's standpoint and actual policy that actually happens. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, is it more of a cultural kind of standpoint in that Grand Rapids has been seen as a great place for business, but certain type of business and certain type of business owners? What needs to happen to kind of shift that, right? Moving it from just general, the main contractors that are doing business in the city to saying, making it more open and what have you. I think it was kind of somewhat alluded to some of the policy and incentive programs. We had kind of alluded to it in some of the incentive programs that we've had. What's the appetite from the commission, what are some of the challenges there? I think it's hard to kind of figure out from the commission standpoint, from the individual boards that kind of give out the incentives, from the developers community standpoint, and from people who are just trying to be entrepreneurs, where the city's heading. And from your standpoint, what would you like to see happening? Or how would it, if that makes sense?
That's a big question. As you know, because of your experience, right? So I think it's twofold. So at the policy level, we need to be very clear on the commission what we're trying to accomplish and the policies that are going to get us there. But then, fortunately, we have a new city manager. If you haven't met him, I hope you get an opportunity to meet him. His name is Mark Washington. He's in his, I think, official third month, maybe fourth month now. But so the structure of our government is unique as well. A lot of large cities, they have a strong mayor, and it's a very different structure. And so we're a part-time elected body, even though I can assure you, Commissioner Jones is working way more than 20 hours a week. As a city commissioner, I should say. So we set the policy and the budget, and then you have the city manager that really does the operations, but then it makes decisions about leadership within the organization. We as an elected body, we only appoint 4 individuals in the entire city, so we have almost 1,600 employees. We appoint 4 of them, so the city manager and the treasurer and the clerk and our city attorney. And then everyone else reports to the city manager. And so part of it is making sure you have a city manager that fully appreciates and understands the will and desire of the commission and what we're trying to accomplish, and can figure out how to get us there through the day-to-day operations and the implementation, and setting a culture that is aligned with where we want to go. Because so many conversations, and you know this, and many of you may already know this as well, a lot of the conversations that happen with developers or businesses or entrepreneurs, they're not always happening. In fact, rarely are they happening with the elected body. They're happening with the staff who are charged with carrying out the goals of of the commission. And so that's where it's really important that we have that alignment. And I feel very, very fortunate that we now that we have a city manager in place. We went almost a year with an interim city manager, which made it very difficult during that transition period to really move things forward. So I know a lot of times we felt really stuck. We felt like we need to, and we even said this publicly during city commission meetings, we need to wait till we have a new city manager. We need to wait till we have a new city manager. We need to wait till we have a new city manager. So I'm really hopeful now with new leadership at the city, especially with someone that has the experience of coming from a city like Austin that experienced 8 years ago what we're starting to experience today, that that expertise and that knowledge, and also his connections. I mean, today I'm in a meeting with him about a whole nother federal issue. And during the meeting, he calls his colleague in Austin, who is an expert on this, and is like, hey, give me some information on this. I mean, what an incredible resource that is, right? That he has this really strong breadth of networks that he can reach out to that can ultimately help our city. So.
All right, so Tommy, you're next, and then we want to start getting some questions in for people who don't talk to the mayor all the time. That was a job. That was a job that Tom worked with the city.
I know, I get it. Yeah, I think this is a good one though. And we won't talk about it on Monday in our meeting, by the way. I didn't want to gotcha. But I do think it's important as we look forward that we have to also look back in the city a lot of times. And one of the things that I've always been challenged with is that our city, a lot of people may know this, our commission are part-time employees, or part-time servants to the city. And so is our mayor, by the way. And we've tried to move the needle on this many times over the years. So the question to you is, do you see us, and going back to that history, when we had more commissioners before, as outlined in the strike, it was reduced down to a number that could be kind of controlled by interest in our city. Do you see in your, or maybe in your term, or maybe even in our lifetime, that we'll begin to add more representation around the table through expanding our commission? Because right now it's I know how many hours you're putting in. I served on the Local Officers Compensation Commission for, I think, 3 terms. And so we surveyed you to find out how many hours you're putting in. I think most people would be really concerned if they knew the hours that our commissions put in. And I'm worried about burnout when we elect people, because that's how they end up making mistakes, or they just don't care, and they run their terms out. And we've seen that over the years in Grand Rapids with commissioners who just don't care. And so to avoid burnout, do you see there's an opportunity to present to the city a case to open the charter to add more seats around, so we have great representation at that commission?
So that's a great question. I'm a big believer in history as well. I do believe we need to learn from history to make the future different. And there is a whole history about how we got to a 3-ward system with 6 commissioners representing each one, staggered terms, part-time mayor, city manager, form of government. So if you don't know the history, there's a great book about it. You know, when I think about, so personally, I think there's real value in looking at the ward system. And having served as a city commissioner for 10 years and representing literally 1/3 of the city, it's a lot to cover. And when you have a great colleague, so I was fortunate to have a great colleague like Commissioner Kelly, but I served with 2 other city commissioners in my tenure. And I can tell you, they're all different, and they don't always all work well together. So it really is dependent on who your colleague is, and if you have a good colleague. So I see real value in looking at the ward system and how it's drawn, and if, you know, I think the big question is whether it's an amendment or a charter revision, and there's all these legal parameters for that. And if you stay with just 6, can you go to 6 wards without having to open up the charter, and can it be done just through an amendment, which is a separate process? And then, you know, if it is opening up the charter, that's a significant process, and potentially a dangerous one. If you don't have the right people around the table, right? And that's true for anything, right? You get the wrong people around the table and terrible things can happen. So my opinion is, and I actually was recently asked this, whatever happens has to be driven by the community. It has to be a grassroots effort. It has to be a community effort. It can't be led by the city. It can't be led by me. It really has to be driven. And there's a whole host of other issues that people want to look at as well with the charter. And, you know, similar to term limits, you know, that was driven by the community. I didn't support it. I still don't support term limits. I don't support them at the state level. I think they're terrible. I think elections are term limits. I think incumbents do actually lose if you have a good candidate run against them and they make the case. And I think we've lost some really good elected officials because of term limits, unfortunately. But I think it has to be grassroots driven. It can't come from my office.
Good stuff. Other questions? Jim.
So a question I have, and I kind of want a perspective from each of you, because I think you're both in, all startup incubator, Mayor Bliss, being a public official, and Andrea and Jonathan, you're kind of in the startup mentality. What do you see as the biggest obstacles in your positions?
Let you start, baby.
Actually, I'll let you start. I've been talking, so let's let somebody else take the floor.
Repeat that for me just one second.
Okay, so like you both have questions, and all four of you have very different perspectives. But I see kind of three groups in your perspective: startup incubator, public official, and startup. What do you see as the biggest obstacle right now to promote diversity of ownership?
Speaking for black businesses, you know, the number one thing that we come across is ability to access the capital you need when you need it. So there's a ton of funds and there's a ton of opportunities. It's from the traditional finance. So traditional is like going to the bank, go and say, hey, I need a loan for $50,000 to start a business, to some of the non-traditional, which is CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions, or micro loans that are sponsored by the SBA or are funded by the SBA. And each of them require different levels, and some require a ton of capitalization and things like that. But when you start looking at, you know, the African American community and the black community, we haven't had real opportunities to really access and obtain wealth just through the history of us being in this country. And so when we look at even the New Deal and how the suburbs was built and how houses were essentially given away at zero down and very low payments, African Americans wasn't able to access that. So when we look at that as being a tool that generational wealth was created through home ownership, initially we were denied access to those things. And today you see that manifested in our ability when we are trying to go to any institution and say, hey, I want to open up an ice cream shop, I need $5,000. They say you're denied, but I can turn around and go get a car for $30,000. And so when we look at the way in which we're able to access capital in our community, that's extremely huge. But then it's also a lack of networks. And so most of us have horizontal networks, and so the relational capital and things like that, that could make up for social capital, as also called, that can make up for not having actual cash in your pocket, that if you knew the banker, and banks are heavily regulated, but they have nuances within there. So they're like, let me see what I can do. Because we don't have that relational capital, we may not have relationships with these different institutions, we're not able to access those. And so it's kind of, you know, one of the things that I say, the largest funder of small businesses, especially in the African American community, is MasterCard and Visa, which come at a high interest rate. And so those are just some of the biggest challenges that we see. And so how do we access capital? But then from a city standpoint, how do we access some of the incentives? And so some of the abatements, how many of us know what abatements we can apply for and what are the access points? And some of them, you know, like if you're in the NED zone, the requirements are higher. So how do we look at how do we lower barriers? And so a part of the work that we do with the Grad 5 is how do we remove barriers for black businesses to survive, sustain, and grow. So that's, you know, kind of real quick.
So you was ready to work. You was ready.
I'm not trying to hear it.
I don't know if I can add anything to that.
Let me say something too. What Jamil just touched on, they do remove barriers. They do. I can attest to that.
Well, thank you, Ray. You want to see the contrast too. You know, I don't just want yes. In your unique position, what do you see?
Well, but I do agree, because I hear that. I guess from my position, very often I get called when there's some type of struggle with the city, with a city department. Whether it's the planning department, I mean, I have a young woman right now who wants to open a place and she's struggling with a special land use and getting a variance. I've had business owners who want to move into an older building and they're being told by the fire department that they need to do all of these things, and which seem crazy to them and cost a ton of money, or they don't have, you know, ADA access to the second floor, and so typically I'm hearing from entrepreneurs or small business owners who are really struggling with some of the struggles specifically with a city department. Or a licensing issue, or, you know, and I think about that even with food trucks. Oh my goodness. My first year as mayor, I took on trying to pass a food truck ordinance, and, you know, I ended up having to sit with 7 different city departments to figure out, you know, how we're going to regulate food trucks, which to me is an entry point for small businesses and entrepreneurs, right? For people who don't have access to capital and can't open a brick and mortar store, we need to create these entry points for them. And so sometimes I feel like part of my job is streamlining and figuring things out, but also getting to yes. And sometimes it's challenging, but I think I've done a pretty good job of it.
And I guess I would say from my perspective, it's pretty similar to what Jamil said, but it's almost like on a different scale. So I'm on the tech startup side of things, and I can honestly say, usually network, because you need to know people in order to get access to capital, which is the other issue. And you know, in my situation, I think it's even more extreme because, you know, I might not be going to ask for $50,000. I might be going to ask for $5 million. Well, how do you do that? Like, you need to know people even in that network to even get to that point where you know who to even ask. So a lot of it is just, you know, trying to figure out how to navigate like the entrepreneurial ecosystem here, and not just here in West Michigan, but Michigan period, in the Midwest. Because one of the most difficult things is trying to figure out how do you navigate, you know, first you're dealing with all the business stuff, and you're actually creating things and making things. And then you have to figure out, well, how do I get funding? Well, you get funding, typically, where's all the funding? It's on both of the coasts. So like, what if you want to stay home? You know, trying to figure that out. So I do think that one of the challenges for sure, you know, probably over the next like 5 to 10 years, I think for Grand Rapids is going to be for the cool things that are happening here. How do we keep them here? How do we like try to nurture and make sure that they stay here? How do we nudge some of these venture capital funds here and angel investment funds that don't actually exist? They say they're angel funds, but they're not. But like, how do we?
One here. There's Kevin. He's the only.
Yeah, but how do we really help people with early stage investment so they can actually be successful and not bounce out of here like with all their technology, and then we never have that to stimulate the local economy?
That's great. That's so great. I think they covered everything. I think I'll predict something that'll be a little cryptic and apocalyptic. One of the things that I'm concerned about is all companies are going to have to become tech companies in some form or fashion moving forward. And there's so much built-in bias in how technology already operates. And so I'm concerned that before a lot of people are even getting in the game, the data-driven commerce is already going to exclude, you know, people who come from the neighborhood that I come from. And so luckily Jay's working on a tech startup to address some of those issues. And we're going to move to our next question. That was very profound, but don't ask us any more questions. Ask the mayor all the questions. You know, all the truths out of the mayor you can, right? In the back, I saw a hand. Go ahead. Project your voice, sir.
Yes. Questions for the mayor. Just quick, in regards to proposal 2 and marijuana legalization, any efforts in the city DMA towards racial equity?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's another one that took up a lot of time. I learned a whole lot about marijuana last year. I mean, I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't know about land use of marijuana. So we did a couple things when we passed the medical marijuana ordinance. So again, we had to look at, under the law, what could we do? And where we landed is figuring out how do we tee up local businesses committed to local hiring, committed to supporting our community. How do we get them first on the list for their application to be reviewed? So when we passed the ordinance, there's anywhere from 50 to 80 different locations throughout the city in different districts where a facility, either a grow facility or a testing facility or a dispensary, will be able to open up shop. And they all want first in line because we put distance requirements in between facilities, which is actually a very good thing because we looked at the downfalls of the marijuana industry in some cities, and one of them was a concentration in neighborhoods, which has a negative impact on a neighborhood. So we put in these distance requirements, and so when you go to put in your application, if you're first in line and you have a 1,000-foot distance requirement from other facilities, you put the stake in the ground, right? And then you take out the 1,000 other potential parcels around you. So getting first in line is very important to the folks who want to open up a marijuana facility in our city. So we knew that, and so we tried to figure out, and we had to get a lot of legal opinions, what could we actually do legally to embed local preference, local hiring, local ownership, to give points that would then be added up to put people in a tier 1 for first on the list to be reviewed. So that was as really, we went as far as we could go, really without crossing a line where we thought we would get sued. And the thing about this industry, there's a lot of money in this industry, and there's a lot of money coming from other states. And I can tell you, I had lots of conversations with people from other states who I would say what they said was on the verge of threatening, whether it was they're going to sue us for this, or they're going to, create a super PAC and get me out of office, or you name it. Lots of fun things were said last year during this conversation from folks who have no relationship with anybody in our city, but they really wanted to open up a shop and make a significant amount of money. So I think we did the best that we could. I think this will lay the foundation for the recreational marijuana once the state gets the regulations in place. They have 12 months to do that. The interesting thing about the recreational marijuana is that there's some language for like craft size dispensaries, like micro dispensaries, which could create an opportunity for local entrepreneurs. So we're really watching that and trying to figure out, what that potentially could look like. The thing is it is a new industry for our community, for the state, and so we're learning as quickly as we can.
Good question. Next question.
All right. Well, Mayor, thank you for your time and for being here tonight and answering the questions that we have about our city. I've been glancing around the room, I've seen a lot of younger people, similar to myself. How can we get involved to impact and move forward with the changes that we're all agreeing upon in this room? That's one question.
Okay.
The other question is, and one that I've had on my mind, you've talked a lot about neighborhoods. I grew up in this area in Grand Rapids, moved away. I was one of the people that went to school here, moved away, lived away for 10 years, came back. What are we doing to hold businesses and maybe even in the workforce, labor force, hold them accountable where they can't hire people in, right, to do a temporary job and then move them around before they can actually get embedded in that company?
Yeah. Oh, I wish I had the answer for that. And I wish I could have an impact on internal organization or company hiring and creating opportunity. When we give incentives, we have clear requirements for job growth and jobs that are created. We actually track it. Kara Wood's department does that. And so during that life of that incentive, we can hold them accountable. We've actually done clawbacks on incentives where companies did not meet those requirements. This body, this commission is absolutely supportive of doing that when they say they're going to do something and they don't do it. I think probably from the policy side, that's one of the greatest impacts we can have. On the flip side about young people, there's a lot of ways to get involved. First, being engaged, being informed, showing up, reaching out, finding an issue you care about, and being involved. There's a lot of things that have happened in the city that were driven by community and really by young people. And some of them seem really small, but I'm a big believer that the small things matter and they make a huge impact. I can think of a small group of folks getting together with me saying we need to change the law and the rules around skateboarding. So 3 years ago it was illegal to be on your skateboard downtown. And guess who ended up getting stopped by the police and having their skateboard confiscated? It's so crazy to me.
No.
Not me. I don't skateboard, but it was young people, right? It was a lot of young people. And what a horrible experience, right? And it was a small group of folks who said we need to change this law. And they organized and they researched other communities and they got that rule changed. That's simple, but the food truck ordinance, I remember I went to a meeting at a guy's house and he had 7 food truck owners and he said, Mayor, you need to pass a law that allows food trucks in the city. And that was driven by people. Like, the beautiful thing about our city is that you really can make a huge impact when you come together and organize, and you can push for change. And it's happened so many times. It's happened in neighborhoods, it's happened at City Hall. You know, people will help you raise money if you have a vision for something. And so I think that is what's a special place. I had a guy from Chicago come and meet with me, and he was astounded that he could get a meeting with the mayor. And he's like, I could never get a meeting with the mayor in Chicago. And then I connected him to some resources. He's doing some great work, some really great work in our community. So I think that's a thing, but you gotta step up. You gotta connect with other people and be willing to sometimes do the hard work to push through change. And then there's the formal side. You can serve on boards and commissions. So I appoint hundreds of folks to serve on boards and commissions. I'm always looking to diversify boards and commissions around every element, every demographic, right? Age, I want young people on our boards and commissions, people of color, women. I actually do an analysis every year of the demographic breakdown of our boards and commissions. I can tell you when I was first elected. So in 2015, at the end of the year, I tried to pull together a bunch of benchmark data to figure out, okay, where are we right now before I'm mayor, and then where do I want to be? And one of the things I did is I looked at all the demographics of the aggregate data from our boards and commissions. And we didn't collect good data at the time. We're better at that now. But one of the data that I did have, the average age of individuals serving on boards and commissions was 62. I know. So I worked really hard to get out, and especially my first year as mayor, and recruit folks to serve on boards and commissions. And then I had my Mayor's Millennial group look at how the descriptions were, the times of the meetings. I now mentor folks from my Mayor's Millennial Advisory. They come with me to boards and commissions. We talk about serving on boards and commissions. We talk about Robert's Rules, which can sometimes be really intimidating to young people who aren't familiar with that kind of formal process. And so I'm doing a lot to try to really mentor that, but step up, serve. There's lots of boards and commissions to serve on. It's a great experience. If you want to run for office, it's a great experience. It's a great way to get your foot in the door and see if that's something that you like. And you can contact my office. You know, the other thing, I'll tell you one other thing that I did is that I looked at our application form for our boards and commissions, so it's called a personal information form. And early on as mayor, there were a number of questions on there that I felt were barriers. So they asked questions about criminal background, so we worked really hard to change the application form to make it more friendly. 3 years ago you couldn't complete it online, you couldn't complete it on your iPhone, it was kind of archaic. So we've done a lot of work to try to make it more accessible, but also to remove barriers.
I want to get two more questions.
Denavia and Margaret.
Denavia, Gina.
Okay, so yeah, I did, thank you. First, thank you again, Mayor. I love you. You're my big
I think I on my board and mission list.
Just apply. But I want to go ahead and ask 2 questions that have been heavy on my heart today before this event. The first being, I often hear you speak. Oftentimes in the same rooms talking about women stepping up, and I've also been a huge fan of your strides in racial equity. But it almost seems like I always hear them in separate lanes, right? You answer a question on racial equity, you answer a question about gender equity, and they're always in separate lanes. But as a huge fan of intersectionality, I was thinking this morning, when they announced that the new Chief Justice of Michigan was a woman. And for the first time in history, the Attorney General, the Chief Justice, the Secretary of State, they are all women in the state of Michigan, which is historic, right? But they're all white women. And I looked at my representatives, Rachel Hood and Winnie Riggs, they're all white women. And I thought to myself, did we really truly progress towards achieving diversity, or are all of the people up my line in politics not white women, right? And is there a priority that we need to put on racial equity? Or can we count ourselves as having made leaps and strides by seeing white women progress? And I feel like you're in the unique position of being a woman, but also being someone who can see the need for racial equity by trusting the data and the narratives of constituents. And I was curious from your perspective for that. And then my second question was just simply about accountability, right? More than ever, we look at national politics and we see people grappling with decisions that they shouldn't be grappling with, like a wall and putting children in cages. And I'm curious about how we hold elected officials accountable, not while they campaign, but years later as they are still in office and making decisions that impact us specifically this year, right? Whereas for years we talked about wanting police reform, but we know this year the union contract is being renegotiated for GRPD. Or we know this year we're choosing a new police chief, which could for years impact the issues that our community has around accountability, the treatment of our youth. What infrastructure is in place or should be in place or can be put in place to hold our leaders accountable, not just on the commission, but even like you mentioned with Mark Washington. So those are my two.
Those are, all right, great, let's see, what time is it? So, yeah, well, I appreciate your feedback, because I absolutely agree about the interconnection and about women in color and leadership. And it reminds me, I spoke at an event to a room full of women, probably about a year and a half ago, and the feedback I gave to the organizer, I said, we need to reach out to women of color, because we need them in this room talking about women in leadership. So I do believe that it is incumbent on all of us. I have to say though, we have had some great women of color move into positions of leadership. So Christina Elmore, I am so happy to see her as the first African-American female circuit court judge in our community. So I supported her in her campaign. She's an incredible role model and mentor. Many of you saw Christian Grant was selected as president of the school board. That just happened in the past week. We have an African-American female on our city commission, now on my county commission. So I don't want to diminish some of the progress that we have seen, but I can tell you I know we have a whole lot more work to do. Not just in elected office. You look at companies, you look at boardrooms. We really need to support women of color in leadership. And fortunately, nationally, we've seen a number of women of color get elected, which I think, again, it's a step in the right direction, but we have a whole lot more steps to take. And then for accountability, I think depending on the level of government, it's different, right? Like, I don't know what we can do to hold anybody in DC accountable, quite frankly. And I really try to save my energy and focus it on things that I feel like I can actually impact. And I'm at a loss for what I'm seeing happen nationally. And I'm not saying I'm giving up. I'm still very, very hopeful. I speak out, but I can't speak out about everything, or I would be exhausted. I am exhausted, but so I really try to focus where can I have an impact. I think at the state level we have an opportunity at the state level to be much more active. I think I saw this especially during lame duck. There were some terrible bills that were dropped during lame duck, and we were successful in defeating some of them. We were successful in amending some of them. We weren't successful with all of them. But the ones that we were able to kill was because people organized and held their elected officials accountable, even the ones that were lame duck and moving out of office. So I do believe that part of it is organizing and staying engaged and saying, this is what we want to see happen, and how do we make sure that we're getting there. Sometimes it's a lot more complex than that. I think there's even barriers to move as quickly as we want sometimes, and I think understanding those nuances is important too, but also how do we get there in a really strategic way, and again, focusing on the impact we're trying to have. And it's not always, what I've learned is that there are many different paths to get to where we want to go, and sometimes it takes longer and it's a little bit more struggle, but we can still get there.
Thank you.
So bring us home.
Yeah, Marco.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Basically, my question was about the entertainment industry. As is, I know that there's no incentives in the state of Michigan or anything like that. But we have so many great actors, great artists here in town, and a lot of them, all they need is just a tiny little bit of help from the city. And I was hoping that you could maybe even just give us a little bit of hope that the city can actually be able to help a little bit towards that industry, because we do have amazing talent here locally, and I'm all about it. So.
Yeah, we sure do. That's interesting. So, so the city manager and I were just talking about that. Because Austin has a number of resources, they also have a dedicated tax to support arts and culture. I was in a meeting last week with a gentleman who's very, very active in the arts community, and they're talking about bringing back together this Arts Council Alliance and getting more folks from different arts and culture groups coming together with some shared goals around what does that look like, and then how do you make decisions? Let's say hypothetically there is a pot of money. How are those funds dispersed? Because I can tell you, I have people call my office every week who think that somehow I have a checkbook and I can write lots of checks to them. And we need to have a vision for what that looks like, and then look at opportunities to make sure that we have the resources. Because I think you're absolutely right. I love our local music scene, our art scene, theater. We're so blessed to have so many talented people in our city. Like, it's amazing. And so I think that's the real question. What can the city do? Is the city the lead or just be a partner? I think there's other organizations that are ripe for playing a leadership role in this. And so I think that would be the questions to ask.
Okay. So we want to thank everybody for coming out. Usually I would hit you guys with the Jay-Z line, you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. You see that today is my birthday. Mayor Bliss for taking this time to spend with us, to share, to detail the work that she's doing. Please look up the city's website, get in contact with everybody, the organizations that she mentioned, Grab, Dre with the Startup World, and Tommy Allen for all purpose, all things. Thank you so much.
And last but not least, Muse, they have some artists over there that are doing live painting, and they would love for you guys to purchase this to go towards their new art nonprofit. So if you like the pieces over there, this will be to help them fund their new art nonprofit. So go over there, purchase the art to help raise some funds for our education in our community.
And one last thing, we have a petition going around.
Oh yeah, if you live in the city and you want to sign a petition.